All right, so I am here with Knoxville. Most of you probably know him from his work with stats at many big tournaments, and we are going to do something a little different. We're going to look at fantasy, and we're going to try and help everybody beat the fantasy system and get those sweet battle points. So
Yep.
first thing that we should do maybe is just kind of like go over the rules for scoring, because they're a little bit like not necessarily what you would expect. Would you say?
Yep.
Like,
Sure. Okay. So, I mean, the basic idea is that there's a bunch of categories. You get points for everything you score in each category, and it all get added up. And you can get bonus points for specific categories. Basically, your goal in fantasy is to do like above average every day, and consistently make better decisions so that you stay in the front. And then more and more people will start dropping off as they make suboptimal decisions.
right, or forget to set their lineups.
Yeah, that is like very important, is to set your lineup every day. So it's kills, deaths, CS, GPM, tower kills, Roshan kills, team fight, wards, camp stack, runes grabbed, first blood, stuns. I got the equation over here. Yeah, okay, so I was right. It's 0.3 for kills, 3 minus 0.3 times your number of deaths. So last hits includes denies. It's not just actual last hits. 0.03 and 0.02 for gold. And then towers, okay, so nothing for assist anymore. Towers is 1 point. Roshan is 1 point. Team fight participation, which is just the number of kills and assists you have divided by the total number of kills your team has. And then you get observers is half a point per observer. Camp stacked is half a point. And runes are a quarter of a point. And then there's stuns, which is 0.05 per stun second. And this is really weird because it also only considers what Valve counts as stuns. So sometimes this is a bit weird.
So does a root count as a stun, for example?
Yes, so it's like really inconsistent about whether it's a like Rod of Atos counts or whether it doesn't count. And a lot of it is just based on whatever the combat log says is a stun, or like a slow or a disable. There's like a variety of different things here, but we'll get to stuns, I guess, a little bit later on when we start talking about like heroes that are specifically good. And then it's the big wild card, which is first blood. You get 4 points for a first blood. On some teams, there are like players that are specifically really good at scoring first bloods. Like you say, it's generally the mid laner and roamers, and normally, even though the roamer's involved in it, they would give it to the core that they roam into. So for different teams, there's different profiles on that.
Right, that makes sense. With the players themselves, like the best mid laner might not necessarily be the best fantasy mid laner, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's like the idea with these points that they're supposed to be like a psychological thing, like, oh, my player's getting lots of kills, my player's not dying a lot, or he's getting lots of runes. And these equate to like a psychological, like, positive feeling that you have. So generally, the players that you feel are doing well, and there's a few exceptions that are specific heroes that just don't score well, like Bristleback. Yeah. So there's a lot of different things that affect the scoring that you have, and I guess we'll get into that as we just go through the different like roles that you have in the game. So according to the fantasy system, you can choose 2 core laners and 1 off laner and 2 supports, and you can have players from any team you want, but you can't have the same player in 2 different slots at the same time.
But you could also have 2 mid laners instead of like a mid lane and a carry. You don't have to have a mid lane and a carry, which is kind of important.
Yeah, and I mean, it's way more important, I think, for the supports, because for the most part you want the hero that is going to be running around active and placing a lot of wards.
We're kind of jumping around, but that is kind of an interesting point, because usually it's like the position 5 support that buys all the wards.
Yeah. So some teams have different setups when it comes to this. So some teams, it's like the 5 position will always buy the wards and pass them over to whoever's going to place them, whether that's actually a core that's running around making plays, or that's the 4 position, or he himself might go around and do it himself. And on other teams, they split the warding duty pretty equally. And on some teams, it's just hero specific. So GH, for example, doesn't put that many wards down, but when Kura is playing specific heroes, then GH is left with the warding duty. So
Right.
there are some laning situations, and the best way to actually like look at that is by just looking back throughout the tournament at the like recent stats as the games are going on, because every time you get to a big tournament like a TI or a major, the kind of meta of the tournament changes completely. So sometimes you have players which you would expect to do something very specific coming in, and you're completely bamboozled. So the first couple of days of fantasy are actually like one of the most important, like that you get. You don't get left too far behind, and you kind of stay in the pack.
Let's just look at the positions first of all. That might be the best place to start because I
Okay.
mean, regardless of what cards you have, everybody who has a companion is going to have some cards. They're not going to have all the cards necessarily. They're not going to have like the best cards of each player, but generally there's going to be specific positions that are good at fantasy for specific reasons. So maybe we can cover that first.
Okay. So cores average between 11 and 20 points each. Um, like this is over the whole tournament. This would be their like tournament average. Um, Extremes are probably 5 to 45 points. Offlaners are the worst role in the game. There was no reason you would pick an offlaner if you could choose three cores like in the past you would be able to. Like TI6, you could choose three cores that didn't have any offlaners. They score between 8 and 12 and a half points throughout a tournament average, and extremes in a single game are between 3 and 23 points. They are pretty much awful. Guess we'll get into that in a little bit. Supports are mostly your consistent point makers. They score a similar range to cores, 11 to 20, 11 to 19. And the extremes are 3 to 30 points. But the thing is that these guys, if you can predict and get solid support cards that you can play over and over every day, they will consistently bring you points back. Like for a core to score very highly, it has to be like there are a lot of things that have to fall into place. It has to be the right type of hero. It has to be a long game. It has to be two evenly matched teams, and the kind of situation for a support to score lots of points is just it has to be a long game. That's all that really has to happen. So you're more likely to pick a really good support than you are to guess which of the cores is going to like go off completely in the game.
Right, and that's actually a really important point is like I know everybody loves Arteezy, everybody loves Team OG, people like Miracle and Liquid, but if like Liquid is playing Infamous, for example, those games are probably going to be over in like 25 minutes. And that's not a good fantasy game, right? And it's going to be
Yeah.
a 2-0 stomp, 25 minutes each, which is not a lot of time to accrue fantasy points where you could have like NP against maybe like LGD or something like that, which could go 55, 60 minutes and be nuts.
Yeah, in general, the longer the matches, the more points that are scored. But there are some stumpy type of games where you'll score very highly, like relatively, but you won't ever have the potential to score like a 40-point game.
Right.
Yeah. So the other thing is that obviously you score more points on average in wins, but you don't. It's not necessarily that everyone scores more points in wins versus losses. Like there's some games where the offlaner on the winning team just has rakes in 9 points, and multiple heroes on the other side will outscore them. So you score on average about 40% more points in a win compared to a loss. But for the most part, your strategy should be picking players who are going to be playing the most number of games per day. So how it works is there's group stage games, which are normally 3 days. And those are best of twos within your robin. And in those games, all of your games count. So naturally, you want to be picking players which are playing the most number of games per day. So there's 9 teams per group. Given how the format of the group stage will go, it won't necessarily be everyone playing 3 games every day. Sometimes it'll be close, but you should always just make sure that whatever team you're picking from, they're playing the most number of games that day. And then when it comes to the best of 3 and playoff series, you're going to be wanting to pick teams that are going to have 2 games that are like solid victories for them, but one of them could also be a pretty long series, because if in a 3-game series, and your best 2 scores count.
So one thing that is kind of important is that in those best of 3s, best of 5s, only 2 games count or 3 games count. So you don't necessarily need to worry about your team having like one bad game in a series, right?
Yeah, so you can sometimes take like a riskier player, like an offlaner that might, for example, have a hero pool where he plays like a bunch of average heroes and sometimes a good hero. You're more likely to pick them in that type of environment than a best of two where they're likely to just, two average games.
Right.
Every day you want to just basically beat the average of everyone else by a couple of points. You want to make sure that if there's like some optimal picks, you want to make sure that you have a bunch of those, and whatever you don't have that's not part of that are just slightly out. So you don't want to drop too many points off like the theoretical leader, because it's very likely that someone is going to consistently get the best picks every single day. I remember last time there was something like, if you came top 1,000, you were like within the first 0.1 percentile. So it's less than 1 million, I think, last time, but it's still pretty high numbers. So tier 6, myself and Gods and Hotbid were all top 100. And on the last day, all three of us, well, on the second to last day, Gods messed up. And on the last day, myself and Hotbid went all in on DC. No, all in on EG, sorry. So I think that's where we all knocked off. If we got that right, we would have been like first or second. So the thing with that was just basically, when it gets to the final day, it is a 50-50. You have to choose the team which you think is gonna win the lower brackets and put up a solid chance in the grand finals. So DC playing 4 games in the grand finals, their 3 best count. They were obviously the best scorers overall that you could safely pick.
That's interesting because they played 2 series versus the other teams only playing 1.
Yeah. So you can make like the best decisions the entire tournament, and it reaches that last day and could be a 50-50.
That's kind of an interesting point, and maybe a good segue into the series themselves. You would like to get a 3-game series every single time for each of your teams or each of your players, because it gives them the most chance to score well. And not looking for stomps, but looking for teams that are probably either middle of the road or have a hard road ahead of them.
Yeah.
Right? Would be the way to think about it.
Yeah. Remember that every team coming into TI, like the skill gap between like the top and the bottom teams starts shrinking a lot, because everyone puts in like a 2-week, 3-week boot camp. Everyone realizes the stakes are in hand here. Everyone's playing their best. Because of that, the scrimming that happens at the event before the game start is normally like teams from different groups that will pair up for practice. And as a result, the teams learn so much in these couple of weeks. And then the meta starts shifting, and certain teams are favored by it, certain teams are really unfavored. Like DC, for example, the meta kind of shifted into a perfect position for them at TI6. It was like all comfort heroes for them. They were just playing Mirana, they were playing Timbersaw, Beastmaster. They had just like a really, really wide, diverse hero pool for resolution. Things were looking great for them, and that's as a result they also started scoring really well in fantasy, because they adapted fast to the meta. They were winning lots of games, and they were picking heroes that were really solid in terms of fantasy scoring.
That makes sense. So regarding heroes itself, where would you look to try and figure out like what are the good heroes? I mean, you can look at the meta on Dota Buff, right, in the high tier pubs, and you can look at previous tournaments, but you don't really know what the meta is going to be necessarily. Yeah,
so the meta is a hard thing to predict. I think the best thing to do is just like looking at the last couple of tournaments from 7.06. So make a filter that has all of those teams in, and add in all the heroes that have been played there. I guess certain characteristics that we mentioned earlier are better suited to heroes that are in a specific category, and sometimes it's just obviously the best categories for each one of the roles. So team fights is actually just generally a super consistent category across all 3 roles. Cores score between 1.7 and 2.3 points on average in this category, which is super middle of the road, decent and consistent. And remember what we said earlier, like on average you're scoring 11 to 20 points. So if you score 2.3 points here, that's like a solid start. At the same time, offlaners score only 1.6 to 2.0, but once again that's like 17-18% of their total points just for one category. And supports also, remember, supports are super active in team fights. They're always going in and they're getting some spells off and then getting just demolished. So they also score about 2 points, 2.2 points per team fight. So and these are averages, right? So this is like a single player over an entire tournament within the specific role. That's how many points he'll score. And obviously, like in a specific game, in a win he'll score like 3.0, and in a loss he'll score like 1.1 or something. So yeah,
Gotcha.
these are quite middle of the road stats, but these are the best ones to work out, which are like the safe and consistent stats to pick. And then you can look at the extremes to see like which are like other options for games which are going insane. So for example, cause really like kills, because in games where they get 20 or 30 kills, that's like another 6 or 7 points that they're getting added to their tally at the end.
Right, and so heroes that get a lot of kills, your Linas, your Ursas, those kind of heroes are going to be extra valuable. Like,
Yeah.
if they're in the hero pool of the person that you're playing, right?
The problem with Ursa though is that because of the nature of the hero, games are generally ended very quickly, or they drag out and he starts falling off. So
Right.
so there are certain heroes which are kind of like traps that you can fall into, but for the most part, it really just boils down to individual teams. And I think like the way I generally think about fantasy is, I look at all the teams that are going to play for the day. I kind of write down for each team what I expect, how many games I expect them to win. So if there's 3 games for the day, I'll just write down all the teams: 3-0, 2-1, 1-2, 0-3. Just go through all the teams that you expect, and then just cut off the teams that are like you expect to do 1-2 or 0-3. Just like scratch them away, right? So now you've only got, let's say, of the 18, you've cut, let's say, half of the teams. You've got 9 possibilities left. You can then boil down and eliminate a couple more that, just teams that you think are going to have a really, really easy 3-0 victory. Like a top team that's matched up against 2 bad teams and a decent team. So you can eliminate those. And once you carry on eliminating more and more people, it generally boils down to, for each of the roles, I think it's like 6 or 7 people that you can consider for core, and 4 or 5 for support. And offlane is normally quite big, because offlane, like I said, is very, very dependent on whether you win or lose. So there's normally like 5 or 6 here for offlane. And to me, when it comes to offlane, is you just want to be conservative and pick a team that you think is going to win their games, because offlanes do so horribly when they lose. They sometimes score like 3 points or something. I think every day, no matter like what the format is or what games are being played that day, it's normally like 5 or 6 people per role, plus or minus a couple.
Obviously, as teams get eliminated, that pool, the pool's going to shrink, and the cards that you can use are going to get less and less. So, are there some scenarios where like you would use a regular Arteezy? You don't have any gold or silver Arteezys team, and your only other option to carry is like a silver or a gold, but they're on like Infamous or something like that. Would you play the regular Arteezy over the gold with good stats Infamous carry?
Yeah, I think for the most part, like, you would generally play a bad card of a player you expect to score well than a insane card of a bad player.
Okay.
I've never had to play like a normal card, but I've played pretty bad silvers before, as opposed to playing like a decent gold for another. Sometimes you just, like, life falls with, like, the luxurious gold Arteezy or gold Miracle, or at tier 5, the gold Miracle that Gods had was plus 25%, and 4 of the rolls were, like, perfect, and one was, like, a plus 20% for something that was also good. So sometimes you just get given a God card like that, and you kind of feel bad using it every day, but you just do it anyway. So sometimes you just get certain things that look good, but for the most part, there's no reason you would never run a silver over a normal for a single player. So just start dusting off all of those normals and just roll more packs. I think for me, the problem with what some people do is they just dust everyone they decide, okay, Team Infamous, I'm going to dust everything from Infamous. And the problem is that, first of all, Infamous could have a good run. And second of all, like, the actual, like, marginal utility you get from, like, dusting a whole team is just like maybe 2 or 3 extra rolls. It's maybe like 1 or 2 extra playables. It's not generally worth it.
So, do you want to go over like the bonuses then, since we're kind of talking about that already? Like, what is a good bonus for the different roles?
Okay, so first of all, the bonuses, you get silver cards and gold cards. Silver cards get 3 rolls, which are bonuses. Gold cards get 5. All of them have the same range. It's from 5 to 25% in 5% intervals. So it can be 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. And some of them are really, really atrocious, and some are really good. So often you'll be using a silver over a gold just because the rolls are better for you. But remember that 25% in, like, let's say 3 categories is probably only like 3 or 4 points more. So in the grander scheme of things, you shouldn't be picking necessarily a card just because, like, oh wow, I've got insane bonuses. You should always think, okay, well, is this card with 4 points extra going to outscore my regular Samael? And the answer is probably no. CS is one that is only really pickable on a core, and otherwise it's not pickable, and generally even on a core it's pretty bad. The most points, I think, at the Kiev Major for CS was about averaging 1.4. So on average you're getting 1.4 points there. Then you have deaths, which are also quite consistent. You get 1.1 to 2.2 points on a core, 1 to 2.1 on an offlane, and very few on a support. Generally, supports in longer games. That's the thing, is support wants the game to go longer. So in longer games, they're more likely to die. So sometimes your rationale for picking a support from one team is not the same for picking a core from the same team. Generally, you want supports from the longest, like, drawn-out games, but you don't necessarily want a core from the same type of game if he plays a specific style. So GPM, you can never ever take on a support. It's okay on a core. It's pretty bad on an offlane, but mostly it's a core. Roshan is something that's just too random for you to predict. It's like less than 0.3 points on every single roll. Roshan's just also not being like a massive characteristic of Dota at the moment. Like, compared to TI3, TI4, Roshan's just not as important an objective, even with the changed cheese. So that's something you just generally avoid. Obviously, wards and camp stacked are meaningless on everyone except supports, and even then, camp stacked on supports is pretty bad. The kind of like premier thing that you want is wards on every single support card you play, and you're only going to play supports that are the primary warder for the team. And when I say primary warder, I'm actually only talking about games and teams which have a dynamic where the one support will place 80% plus of their wards. You can also look on this other website, datdota.com. It has, under frames, it has observer wards placed by time. So you can also look to see, like, by the 10-minute or 12-minute or 15 or 18-minute mark, which players place the most wards, which is pretty helpful for this, because sometimes the average ward stats are like more a factor of how long the games are than anything else. So you don't want to have to, like, EG, for example, their players have placed more wards on average than others because their games happen to have been really long recently.
Okay.
Yes.
So shout out to Dat Dota for sure then.
So First Blood, also something that's like highly chaotic. The only time you ever want to pick this is sometimes a mid player and sometimes a support player that is your 4-position roamer. Okay, stuns is the only thing left. So stuns is something which is very, very hero dependent. Obviously, you can't just stun someone if you're a dazzle. You don't get that many points for the mini stuns. But for the most part, this is something which is like very, very meta dependent and very, very hero dependent, like hero pool dependent on the specific players. So heroes that are really, really good in each of these roles. There's a core. You have Ember Spirit, because the Searing Chains counts as a stun. You have Invoker, because so many of the spells count as stuns, or mini stuns that all add up. Mirana, 5-second arrow, is you just see the points cascading down. Lena's a hero which has been really popular, also lots of points. Fata is someone who spams his hero and he gets huge amounts of points. And DK is another hero.
Its stun is long, yeah.
Stun is long and it's got a really short cooldown. And for the most part, he also takes a lot of towers. So that's another thing that you'll see a lot of, is tower taking. Really racks up for specific players. Like No-Tail. No-Tail was scoring like 4 points average at the Kiev Major on just towers. Terrorblade, Lycan. Yeah, Drow. And then you also have things like more mid heroes, which are like Shadow Fiend, Ursa, which can play in both lanes. For the most part, the reason that mid laners are better than safe laners is because of runes. So runes can also be up to 4 points average per game. You get a quarter of a point per rune, so 16 runes in a game is pretty easy if you're just picking up bounty runes. And for the most part, you see the kind of very active, moving around mid players. They're scoring like a huge amount of points every game just from taking the mid tower, taking objectives, getting a lot of runes, and doing a lot of work in team fights. The type of player you don't want to see is someone who just runs away from fights and isn't active in the fights because they lose in so many of the categories.
And would you say generally mid players, like if you have the opportunity to, you'd play 2 mid players over a mid and a carry?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a few exceptions, like if there's a very close matchup and you don't know who's going to win between 2 teams, the mid players that lose sometimes get hurt pretty hard if they're on specific heroes, like if they get super crushed and the enemy supports are just camping mid and they score nothing, then in those games, yeah, you don't want to have a mid player, but for the most part, I would say you're generally looking at having 2 mid players, and sometimes it's a mid and a carry from another team, because teams have different setups, so in some teams, it's the mid player who's the active player. In some games, it's the safe lane player who's active. Anna scores really well some games, and N0tail scores bad. And in other games, it's N0tail who scores well, and Anna scores bad. So you have to kind of get a feeling of which of the teams are performing well, which are on the up and up, which are on the down and down, and which of the teams, how the teams are adapting to the changes that are happening in the tournaments.
So then, looking at the players that we have, I mean, like we could talk forever about hero pools and all of that, and we don't want to make this video like 8 hours long. So maybe we can just look at like a few specific top players in each role.
Yeah.
And then maybe give a little bit of reasoning, like just hero pool or play style that makes them a good pick.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, overall, the best players that we've seen in terms of average points are generally your mid cores, and those are people like Abed was in DC. He was the star player at the Kiev Major. But for teams that are going to be at the International, it's going to be Sumail, Anna, Mid One, No One. These are like top players that's generally mid and generally score really well. Just behind that, you get players like SCC from Newbie. He scores really well. He was probably like, I think, one of the most, despite Newbie doing pretty badly at Kiev, he scored super, super well for me in a lot of games. Arteezy, Burning gets very active. He takes lots of towers, and he's not afraid to get involved in team fights. When he's drafted specific heroes, he's right in there from the get-go. Same with Ramses. Ramses, very active player, wants to get involved. And the star player, I think, kind of super surprising player, was Cuckoo. From TNC.
Cuckoo gets so many kills like every single game. He's nuts. I think he averaged the most first bloods of anyone in the tournaments, so he scores a huge amount of points. And the thing with Cuckoo is also, maybe the problem is that like in certain games, specific matchups, he scores incredibly, incredibly high, like top 10. And in other games, he's slightly below average. So he averages out. He's still like a top 10 overall core, but he's not, he's not number 1, not number 2. Then in terms of supports, Kaka has been consistently great every single event he's been in. So what makes him great is he puts a lot of wards down. Like he's not the guy who's going to hold onto wards or save up to buy boots or something. He's placing wards from minute 1 all the way through. Faith sometimes does specific hero matchups, but for the most part, Kaka's your main warder. Same with Solo on Virtus Pro. Lil pretty much is like one of the worst players from a fantasy perspective, because he just goes around and creates chaos, and there's no points for chaos. But right. Solo's putting a huge amount of wards down. Baboka scored really high in Kiev Major, but one of those was also because he got a lot of points for, slightly higher than normal points for stuns, because he was playing a lot of Monkey King and getting stuns here and there. With the ultimate, before the Basher change, right?
Yeah, there were like a lot of unusual reasons in which he scored there. And in terms of the offlaners, it just becomes a bit dirty, because offlaners don't really score very well. They like the best offlaner is probably like 30 or 40, no, maybe even 50 point places down out of 80 players. Like if you were to take all the players and sort them by average score, like the last couple of pages are just like bad supports and offlaners. And what's really weird about offlaners is that, like I said, it's the offlaner role specifically is like very hero dependent. So the offlaners which did the best in the tournament aren't necessarily the ones that you would think, wow, these players played really well. I mean, I scored well because he is actually like was a solid player, scored really well. But then you get like Sam H and Skylark, who both got knocked out pretty early, but they scored really, really well as offlaners. Mind Control had a few games that were really good. I think he was overall the like the surprise offlaner to score so well. Like he's just a consistent player, so you don't expect him to see that. But the reason for that is, like I said, it's to do with the hero pool. So certain heroes you score really, really well in the offlane with. Nyx Assassin, Sand King, Clockwork, and those primarily come from stuns. Like the games in which good things are happening for offlaner, it's always like a longish type of game, and he's playing some sort of stun initiator, Clockwork, Sand King, Nyx, Centaur, and then there's also Furion because he's just so active around the map. He's involved in he gets like an assist every time he casts his ulti on every kill, so that's the reason that he's also farming a lot, involved a lot, takes towers. So you have to kind of you kind of have to think about which heroes players are going to start playing in the tournament, and like avoid specific players like your Tidehunter's, your LCs, your Omni Knights, your Axes. They're great heroes to watch, but they're just not going to score well in fantasy.
Is there any merit to picking like a more farm oriented offlaner? Like, I mean, Universe is often seen as like the carry of EG sometimes, right? When he's on a Void and he gets more farm than anybody else, or like somebody going nuts on Batrider who takes a lot of the jungle, or if like KP were to run Naga from the offlane or something like that, right?
Most of the things that, like, the reasons that you would pick an offlaner are not really well suited to scoring. Like we've been through this. Like farming just doesn't get you a lot of points. CS and GPM are too bad. You're going to get your tower most of the time as an offlaner, but sometimes when supports or your mid shows up. So you're going to get that either way, like no matter what type of role you are. Team fights, if you're playing a farm heavy offlaner, you're going to try avoid team fights a little bit more than you normally do. So that's going to be down. You're not going to put wards up. You're going to not stack any camps. You're going to get a couple of runes from your from by your shrine, but not that many. So it really is just stuns that scale so well for you. So I would generally only pick an offlaner that is going to be like a winner. And if it's a choice between multiple winners, to me, it's just someone who's going to pick a hero that is going to score better on average. None of this like Timbersaw type. Like the reason that ISS had so many points average wasn't because of his hero pool. It was more because he was just doing so much in the game. Skylark and Sam H, I don't think anyone would say were like top 5 offlaners of Kiev, but they were, fantasy-wise, they scored really well. The problem is that the fantasy system just doesn't have a specific way to reward offlaners. Like, there's no way to quantify what they do that's so good. Like you say, Universe is a brilliant player, and I mean, I agree completely, but he was only like 5th or 6th overall in Kiev in terms of average points. And it was...
And if you look at his hero pool, it doesn't actually contain a ton of stunners usually, right?
Yeah.
So
like you say, they sometimes give him and KP slightly more farm heavy roles. Sometimes when that happens, you get a huge number of points, but for the most part, it's suboptimal. And quickly before we get on too far, let me just say the supports is a very similar type of situation. There's some supports which are brilliant. Crystal Maiden, Ancient Apparition, Earth Spirit, Witch Doctor, Rubik. They run around a lot. They fight a lot. They stun people a lot. They disable people a lot. You just see points just cascading, and they also put a lot of wards up. And the heroes which score really badly are things like Io and Phoenix. Now, what's interesting is that like sometimes you get people who have a preference for playing things like Phoenix, but they also put a lot of wards down. So Fly on OG plays a lot of Phoenix, but he's also so sometimes you have to kind of weigh these things up. And for the most part, when it comes to supports, you pick the person who puts the wards down. When you're a core, you pick someone who picks up a lot of runes. And after that, you can think about everything else.
Makes sense.
The only thing I think for core, which is like very hero dependent, is tower kills, and that's just basically if you have a preference for playing a hero which takes lots of towers, then sure, I'll pick you a tower kills bonus if I can.
So, without getting into any of the hero specifics, because we've said that's going to take too long. Who would you say are like the top 3 players in each role? I'm not just talking core offlane support, but like carry, mid, offlane, roamer, and support. Just if people are going to disregard your advice and play 2 mid laners, they want to play a carry. What's the carry that they should play? Would you say?
It's really tough to say because in different games, people like the team strategy kind of switches up a lot. To me, the guy who always performs well in as a carry is Raven. He just gets lots of points. He takes so many towers. He's a very quick thinker. So if I had to take a carry, I would take Raven and Burning as well. I think I would also take. Let me see who else there is. Ramsey sometimes scores well, sometimes scores badly. Lifestealer is a hero that does badly, so I would generally avoid him. Yeah, so SEC Mugi, he's an undercover champion, really.
Mugi is?
Yeah. I like him.
Huh.
Then
what do you think about Eternal Envy? He usually plays long games. He's fairly active.
So when he's playing, if the meta is he's to kind of say this, you have to look at heroes, because sometimes he plays heroes which are brilliant. Like when he's playing Eternal Envy style Ember Spirit, and he's everywhere, he's doing Envy things, going in and out of fights, stunning people forever, then sure, I would take Eternal Envy. But for the most part, I think he doesn't score that well. Not a huge fan of him from a fantasy perspective. And I don't know, it depends on how tough their draw is. To me, he's like someone I would consider as maybe bottom of tier 1, top of tier 2 in terms of carry, if I had to make 3 tiers. But for the most part, I think there's almost always someone who's better than him. Arteezy is quintessential, better than Envy in every regard in terms of fantasy. There's a couple of games where Envy's beaten him, but I think Arteezy is a safer bet.
Cool.
In terms,
how about mid?
Yeah, so like we were saying with U9 Mugi, he's a god. SEC is his counterpart in godlike status. I really like SEC. He was very undervalued at TI6. Yeah, so mid 1, Sumail, Fata in the last 2 months, Fata's averaged the highest fantasy points in all games. He is super good. I would also like to say that he is a big Lina player, and that is a lot of stun time that comes out there. So definitely could take him. Let's see. Miracle sometimes has great games. Same with Anna. Same with FN. FN and Cuckoo are really solid and aggressive players, and the system rewards that. QR as well. They like to just get up in your face and start fighting you. I think that the system definitely rewards that, and as a result, you should take advantage of that. No one on specific heroes has great times, but for me, I would say Sumail, Abed, SEC mid 1, and Fata. Those five are my top players at the moment.
Okay.
Remember that every day you're going to eliminate teams and players you just can't pick. So having a pool of 5 here probably means that 3 get through, and then 2 other options become available from the lower tiers. From the offlane, wow, this is actually super tough. I don't like I don't like very many of the offlaners. Just based, like I said, it depends too much on their hero pool. S4 is a brilliant player, but his hero pool is sometimes really bad for fantasy. XSX was consistent at Kiev. I'd probably take XSS, Universe, and S4 and Sam H. And that's only because Sam H actually scores so well. Sometimes and Nan Pasha would be my 5th. Mind Control scores pretty averagely even when they dominate. And like I said, you're going to want to be picking someone who does really well when they win and does okay when they lose, and you're going to be picking them when they win, hopefully.
Right. So you want the offlaner to be on a team that likes to fight, basically, as seen with like Nine Pasha and Sam H. Like those two teams are like the quintessential fight you until the game is over teams, basically.
Yeah, definitely. Then when it comes to position 4, I think there's like a clear person to pick here, and that's Kaka. He is the ward guard. I mean, Faith puts wards down, but normally, like, even in a game of like 30 minutes, Kaka puts like as many wards down, even with Faith warding, as someone like other teams where they have like just one person who puts the wards down. GH is First Blood guard. He is, like I said earlier, there's some teams where there's a position 4 who's always involved in First Bloods, and generally they give it to the core, but not with GH. He takes those. Jirax is also brilliant. Zai, and that's about it actually from the position 4s. I think there's like quite a limited hero pool, player pool that you can pick from there. Yapsel's also not bad, but most of the time, like I said, you're picking someone who's a position 5 heavy warder. So in that front, probably looking to go with Solo, Fly, DDC, DJ. Like those are brilliant. Problem with Puppy and Kuro is that in Kuro's situation, you sometimes see GH Guard do warding if there's a specific hero matchup. Like they're a team that swaps it up quite a bit. And same with like Puppy. Sometimes Yapsel wards, but generally it's Puppy. But Puppy sometimes plays a hero which is more conducive to feeding, and that's obviously not really good. So yeah, I would say Solo, Fly, DDC, DJ. Those are solid picks. And then Paladai is also really solid if you think that the NP or Cloud9 games are going to go really long. Crit scores really well in specific games that are like big slugfests. He always scores well. But for the most part,
if he's gonna play IO, you definitely don't want to pick.
Yeah, if he's gonna play IO, like if you think that the other team's gonna let IO through, you just let that go.
I guess the last thing that I wanted to maybe cover, well, we kind of already did talk about bonuses, like for the specific roles, right?
Yeah.
What would be like your ideal core card? What are the five roles you'd want?
Okay, well, I think I'll go 3 and then +2, if that makes more sense. Okay. So if you have like silver and then the 2 that you would have if you had gold on top of that. For the most part, it depends on the player, so it's either between stuns and tower kills, whatever like is more suitable for the player. And then it would be runes and kills. And then fourth stat would probably be team fights, I think. I think team fights and deaths are your like 4th and 5th best. For offlane, it also is really situational, but team fights and stuns are like the best 2 if the player plays a hero that is a stunner. And runes is also pretty solid, but for the most part, like offlane is kind of a wish-wash. You're going to be picking someone who wants to win. That's about it. When it comes to supports, you cannot pick someone who is not the primary warder, and as a result, plus 20% wards means that you're getting almost like 1.6 extra points, 1.7, sometimes 2 points for free just because they're the warder on average. Team fights is also really solid, and runes is also really solid if they happen to be the warder who's a 4. So that's why Kaka's so good, because he runs around putting wards down, picking up runes, just getting things done. For the more like defensive heroes that like the Paladais, the heroes that like standing back and doing things, if they happen to be playing heroes with a lot of stuns, then stuns is probably okay. But if they're the more active 4, then First Blood is the appropriate 4th position there. If it's so summary there was runes, wards, and team fights, and then sometimes stuns and First Bloods will kick in if they are more appropriate.
Gotcha. Cool, man. Was there anything else that you wanted to cover?
I think just one hint is to always set your team for the next day while you're thinking about it. Rather just as soon as you can, like as soon as you see the schedule, just put in some ideas for what you think is going to happen every day and then adjust after that. And then also look at how the like meta develops for game length, because certain like if we start seeing like a tier 4 type of meta where some teams are playing very fast dynamic and some are playing a little bit slower, you actually want to be picking the slower teams if winning still. So game length is the most important thing here. Otherwise,
yeah. So that's one other thing I did want to mention is that like there's definitely in the team pool that we have, we've got, you know, like the objective based teams, we've got like the slow kind of farming control teams, and we definitely have the aggressive teams. And an aggressive team might go up against a slow team and steamroll them. But if you have an aggressive team that's not that good, like if you have Infamous, for example, playing against an OG,
yeah,
Infamous wins games by steamrolling teams, but they're not going to steamroll OG.
Yeah.
So,
and also like they're not going to score well if the game goes long and they pick a steamroll heavy lineup. So you have to kind of get in the mind of the teams, and the best way to do is like you think that you have so many like decisions to make. You're like, shit, there's like 36 people I can put in this role, 18 in this. Start off and just start cutting our teams. Like write down the 18 team, the members that you think are going to go in as your water. Start scratching off the ones that aren't going to play that many games. Scratch off the ones that you think are going to lose a lot. Just like try to reduce the problem over and over until you're left with 5 or 6, and then no matter what you do from that point, you're going to score well.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I think that wraps it up. Thank you to Knoxville for joining us, and good luck, everybody. Hopefully you score well, but, you know, we hope that Knoxville and yours truly wins. So good luck, everybody.
Cheers, Donnie.